Hello, Turks and Caicos. Happy Saturday. And I would like to welcome you all to Uncut. And today we're doing something new where we've decided to actually go live on Instagram because I know a lot of persons, especially millennials and Gen Z, probably don't have Facebook and don't use Facebook. So I'm catering to you guys. Unfortunately, you're not able to see my guest today, Mr. Zhavago Jolly. However, I encourage you, if you do have access to Facebook, head on over to Facebook so you can be a part of the conversation and definitely get involved with us. And today we're going to be speaking about structuring legislation to empower Turks and Caicos Islanders. And I'd like to welcome our guest, Mr. Zhavago Jolly.
Hey, thank you, Melendra. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the program today, and I'm looking forward to a lot of stimulating conversation and hopefully inspiring your listeners and the guests to kind of continue the fight in terms of pushing for legislation that betters the life of Turks and Caicos Islanders first and foremost.
Yes, definitely. I'm excited for the conversation. I know that it will definitely open up the minds of our viewers and actually help them to think a little bit deeper. And that's the goal of Uncut, to help you to think of things differently and don't just take information as it is thrown at you. Try to do some independent thinking, try to do some research. So I'm excited to have you here today, Mr. Jolly. And firstly, we would like to know, is the empowerment of Turks and Caicos Islanders a systematic or a political issue? Because a lot of times we tend to politicize it, and we'd like to know your intake on that.
I think it's a good question. Unfortunately, the answer to the question is yes. It's both a systematic issue and a political issue, and I'll tell you why. It's systematic in the sense that we have become systematically comfortable with surviving with legislation that isn't directly created to better our lives. And by our lives, I mean Turks and Caicos Islanders. If you look at the laws on which we live in now compared to 10, 15, but probably 15, 20 years ago, an individual has to basically work under much more difficult circumstances than they would have. We talk about Turks and Caicos Islanders having access to land and capital, whether through organizations like Invest TCI at the time, or TC Invest at the time, which is now Invest TC, being able to get a piece of commercial land and residential land, access to capital through our own local bank, which was TCI Bank. When you look at the situation 20 to 15 years ago, there were much more opportunities for a person like yourself or even myself to be successful, because there was systematic legislation in place to make life a little bit more easier or create more opportunities for us. Now, the reason I say it's also a political issue is because legislation is decided by the House of Assembly. The people that sit in the House of Assembly are duly elected by the voters of the Turks and Caicos Islanders. So they are politicians. So we play a role in selecting the individuals that draft, create, and vote on legislation. So that's why I think it's both a systematic and a political issue.
I think I totally agree with that. We've definitely became complacent with just taking what we're given. And however, I do feel as if that is changing because, of course, a new generation is coming up, a more vocal generation is coming up, a more demanding generation is coming up. So I do feel as if slowly but surely we'll see that changing, especially based on the fact that Gen Z will begin, well, Gen Z is already voting because Gen Z would technically begin from about 97. So last election would have been the first time Gen Z would have been able to vote. And now this would have been the second year. So you have a whole other pool that's now coming into the mix. And Gen Z tends to be not only demanding, but persistent with the demands. So don't just think they're going to ask and let it go. So hopefully we'll see.
I agree. I think, listen, you and I had the conversation. Your I am so impressed by your generation. And I think it needs to be taken a step further. You guys need to continuously be encouraged to continue to ask these difficult questions and make these difficult demands, because you're being put in a situation that is unprecedented. Even in my generation, many of us were able to benefit from the tail end of some of the legislation that we talked about. But your generation would have grown up with much more difficulties in terms of getting scholarships, getting land, getting capital, buying your first home, stamp duties, all these things that under in previous times could be possibly waived, or it's just more challenging for a young person in this generation to achieve a certain amount of success or even just a lifestyle now. So I am very impressed with your generation, because you have the responsibility to make those demands of your country. You're Turks and Caicos Islanders. So any legislation should reflect positively for Turks and Caicos Islanders.
I totally agree with that. In terms of where we are as a nation, of course, we want to see the country advance. However, do you feel as if we focus a little bit too much on infrastructure and not enough on legislation?
Well, unfortunately, the two go hand in hand. Legislate your budget, everything that goes towards legislation is decided again in the House of Assembly. It's drafted by civil servants, departments, and then permanent secretaries who are the accounting officers for the various departments. But ultimately, it ends up in the House of Assembly. So any kind of infrastructure expenditure ultimately has to go through the hands of a politician. So I do think that, all right, let's just bring it home. We need direction. So ultimately, when you start talking about legislation, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's education, whether legislation about education, enforcement, or economy, if there's no conversation centered around Turks and Caicos Islanders, then there's really no point. Legislation is the answer to the question. It's not the question. Legislation is a response to the needs of your people. So your legislation should be reflected based on the concept Turks and Caicos Islanders first. And so whether it's infrastructure, whether you're focused on education, whether you're trying to strengthen law enforcement, whether you want to build a stronger local economy, all that needs to be centered around benefiting Turks and Caicos Islanders, because we have existing legislation and it works. But unfortunately, it just doesn't work for us.
Yeah. I feel as if we have a huge problem with the enforcing of a lot of legislation. So it's there on the books, but we have a problem translating it into real life. And I'm not sure if it is a manpower problem or where the fall down is, but we definitely have that problem with translating, as well as with a lot of our government bodies working cohesively, because it's one body, but sometimes the arm doesn't know what the foot is doing. So we need to get that body coordination back in place.
You're absolutely right. Enforcement it requires a certain level of cohesiveness. I think when you look at other countries, they usually invest a lot of money in the proper software that allows you to consolidate all the information that makes it possible to enforce laws across many different features, whether you're talking about immigration law, law enforcement and policing, marine. I think our issue, though, unfortunately, or what I would recommend is our issue, unfortunately, is we have very good men and women in the civil service. And I've seen that personally. But when it comes to enforcement, it's not even one of the highest paid sectors in the civil service. You look at police officers, you look at immigration officers, you look at custom officers, and this isn't a knock at anyone. I just feel like when you get into the enforcement field, one of the biggest sellers is not just good salaries, but pension programs for people who are, exactly, when you take on an enforcement role, there's constant risk to your life, your reputation. So when you start looking at our civil service, I mean, in terms of, well, not just civil service, but when you start looking at enforcement, I think one of the first things you want to start looking at is how much people our enforcement are being paid, and do they feel like there's a culture within where they work that allow them to take pride in what they do and in serving their country. So it's I think it's a double pronged sword or a two-sided sword in that case.
I definitely tip my hats off to them, all of the enforcement team, because I'm not sure if I was going to risk my life for that paycheck. So I really kudos to you guys. We really appreciate the work,
It's
and
tough.
your heart have to be in it to do
Yes.
it right.
Listen, I was a young guy that would make life difficult for police officers or anyone in law enforcement. I mean, not criminally, but we'd make fun of police officers, and you had the jokes to go along with it. But as you become an adult and you realize the kind of sacrifice, especially people in law enforcement, have to make, considering how much they make, and it's not that they don't make enough money or a lot. It should be more. You should be paid handsomely, and there should be a retirement plan or a pension plan in place for doing that kind of work. It's costly.
Definitely. So just now we spoke about the cohesiveness of the body parts, and of course, the private sector does form a part of our society. Does the private sector also have a social responsibility to empower Turks and Caicos Islanders?
Absolutely. But if you look, I think I think what has happened is the structure has become distorted. So if we had a stronger, what I call local private sector, there
Right.
would be a kind of national pride associated with the development of your country. But when you look at our private sector, it's it's a little top heavy, but in terms of top heavy, it's not top heavy with Turks and Caicos Islanders. So we, because of the way our private sector is constructed, we see a lot of money made in Turks and Caicos, but we see a lot of money move out of Turks and Caicos constantly. I make that joke all the time. Our biggest export is money.
Yeah.
We have tourists come in, a million tourists a year. I think the last figures were, and they spend a lot of money, and then we can't wait to ship that money out. So you would think that the private sector has a great responsibility to contribute to just the overall benefit of Turks and Caicos Islanders. But when it's not your national agenda, you can understand why it doesn't take place. And then you create this kind of power imbalance where the private sector has a certain amount of influence over the whether it's the government or the people of Turks and Caicos Islanders, because they control more of the money.
Definitely. I think we have serious work to do in that department. And I feel as if a lot of things need to be in place for that. Firstly, we need to ensure that those investors who come in with the sweet deals about employing X amount of Turks and Caicos Islanders, yes, you have to live up to your commitment. And a lot of times we just allow them to fall short. And that is a huge downfall on our part because we don't hold them to their word and we don't hold them accountable. There's also ways around keeping the money in the country, around letting the money out of the country. So you create incentives to keep it here. So you tax the dollars going out, or you create some sort of incentive within the islands for them to keep their money here. So we now have to begin to think of ways to pressure them to keep the money circulating here mostly instead of abroad, because what good is the million tourists being here if it's not really benefiting us for the most part?
I think you're absolutely right. That needs to be one of our primary focus, is building our, what I like to call our local economy, our internal economy. One thing COVID has taught us is that it's easy for Turks and Caicos to look like we have a lot of money. And then it's easy to see that many of the Turks and Caicos Islanders, we're not as fluid. So COVID comes, airport locks down, hotels close. All of a sudden, your internal economy, your local economy begins to struggle. That means local businesses just don't have enough access to capital and beneficial legislation. And the government has taken strides. Invest Turks and Caicos, the Ministry of Finance, they've done, I would say, a lot over a period of time. But for me, I just would like to see more creative solutions in terms of making capital available for local businesses. We need more local businesses. We need to create more opportunities for local businesses to grow. We specialize in mom and pop shops. We have one person that does everything. The one person is the accountant, one person is the sales and marketing, one person is the office manager. We need to create opportunities where a local business person like yourself can get access to capital, where you can hire a good accountant that's going to help you grow, hire a good sales team that can help you grow, hire an office manager that can help you grow. And your main focus as the brains behind the project is to help grow your business, find new markets to expand in. We incentivize inward investment, which is needed and is terribly beneficial, but we don't offer half of those kind of incentives to local businesses. And I think that's a problem, because when the airport shuts down, we're the ones that has to take on the burden of keeping the economy going.
Yes, definitely. And I also think Cayman is a perfect case study for us. I know everybody, all eyes has been on Cayman recently. So Cayman has been a perfect case study for us to look at, because they have been able to keep their borders closed and still be up and running, still support their people. So what is it? We now need to look at what is it that Cayman is doing as a nation that we're not doing? What market have they tapped into? And that is probably the financial industry, which is something that Benjamin Durham and I spoke about on one of the first episodes, to tap into that market, because then you could close your borders comfortably and not have to worry, because the money's still flowing.
Mm-hmm.
People still spending money.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we were on a lockdown and people are claiming they're hurting, real estate still selling. Like,
Yep. Listen, I
things are
talked
on the
about it.
market.
The legislation is there. The legislation is working. It just doesn't work for us. The same thing about the economy. The economy is there. The economy turns, but the economy doesn't always turn for us. It goes back to the age-old story. We can't do anything without saying the words Turks and Caicos Islanders first. And I made a statement of it, and I think it's become almost an insult to utter these words. You say Turks and Caicos Islanders first, and then people get sensitive, like it's almost xenophobic, or as if having some kind of a nationalist point of view is offensive. But if you can't say Turks and Caicos Islanders first in Turks and Caicos, then where can you say it?
Exactly. And we have to be unapologetic about saying it, because nowhere else in the world will you be able to say Turks and Caicos Islanders first.
You're
Like,
absolutely right.
nowhere. And we have to take pride in saying that, because at the end of the day, this country is here for us and it's not going anywhere. And majority of us aren't going anywhere, even if we go off of school for a little bit. At some point, this is home, so you're coming back.
You're absolutely right. Listen, many of us have gone to do tertiary education overseas. And one thing you know about us, if it's in the UK, if it's in the US, if it's in Jamaica, other Caribbean countries, when something pop off, you're going to see that flag with that lobster and that flamingo. As my mother used to say, wave it. We have national pride. It isn't a question of whether it's present. The problem is, I think, at some point at home, national pride became a whisper, something that you had to kind of whisper amongst your friends. But if you say it out loud, it's a possibility that it could cost you an opportunity, whether it's a business opportunity or anything for that matter. It can end in a bad discussion. And I think, especially for my generation, we grew up when there was almost an arrogance about the whole Turks and Caicos Islanders first. You know, we thought, and we still think, but we always thought that we deserved the best. Buildings flying up, 7 stories, hey, no problem. You know, everyone has 2 jobs, everyone has scholarship going there. So we had some very grand expectations of where our country was headed. And although things didn't necessarily work out as planned, that doesn't mean our expectations change. It doesn't mean we don't think as Turks and Caicos Islanders, we deserve the best for Turks and Caicos. And I think at no point in time should we ever stray away from that. We can't ever get comfortable with someone saying, look, that's just how it is now. That's
Exactly.
not how countries grow.
That's not how it is. And I see Bernicia Cox says that there's been a trend now where some are intending not to come home, leaving a vacuum. I feel as if that is the case because we've neglected Turks and Caicos Islanders first. So when you come home with your big degree, you can't get paid for that, or you will get paid for it, but you'll get underpaid more than likely. So we now need to incentivize it, and the same deals we are offering to the expats, we need to offer to our locals. And I bet a lot of them will come running. Yeah, pay for their housing when they come home because you were going to pay for it for someone else anyway. Give them the salary you were going to give to somebody else because you were going to spend that money anyway. And this local is qualified for that. So once you begin to give them the incentives that are as sweet as those that are going to expats, because why do you think the expats are running here? Because the incentives are sweet.
Absolutely.
They get paid a decent salary. They're getting paid. Their housing is getting paid for. They have a car when they arrive. Some maybe even have food stipend for all I know.
Absolutely. Listen, we as Turkside, we never know the opportunities that anyone else gets. We just see life looks great. And I think this idea that any request made by a Turks and Caicos Islander is unreasonable. That's an oxymoron. That term does not exist. As a Turks Islander making a request in Turks and Caicos, how else do you achieve? How else does the generations that are coming up, how else will they achieve greater things that we can ever imagine if we're constantly lowering expectations? Our children, not even Generation Z, our children that are coming up need to think anything is possible for them in this country. Any opportunity, any growth. Our children should be talking about the Turks and Caicos space program. They should be talking about getting in the arms race to get to Mars. They should be talking about building flying cars. If we don't give the idea that Turks and Caicos is a place where you can have these grandiose expectation or your imagination will be engaged by your legislation and your people, we're going to lose our children to other countries, the same way you're talking about what Ms. Cox said. Brain drain is a real thing. Other countries are out there headhunting the best from small countries like ours. They're offering them jobs, opportunities, citizenship. You get a job at one of these big companies, they have everything waiting for you. For you, they'd have a husband sitting down there waiting to marry you as you touch the ground. They're not leaving any stone unturned. So why are we just paying to educate people, allowing you basically to live the Turks and Caicos dream to a certain extent? You take your first step here, you drop your first tooth here, you learn to speak in Turks and Caicos, and then all of a sudden we let another country come and sweep you up. That makes no sense.
It really doesn't. And I see Mr. Bean in the comments says students need to honor their bonds. That is a part of growth. But also, it's not, I don't think the problem over the years has been student honoring their bonds, but it's more so government enforcing it. So there's been so many stories out there about students coming home, reporting to government, hey, look, I'm home, I'm ready to work, and government say, well, we ain't got nothing for you to do, go find job elsewhere.
I agree. I'm sure there's the odd case where someone's like, you know what? I just came from 4 years of college. I love my life here. I love my friend. I don't want to go home right now. Right. But no Turks and Caicos Islander is ready to just run away from their family, their life, everything they grew up experiencing willy-nilly. I think if you look at the numbers, I think the alarming majority want to come home, want to work, want to put that degree to use. You're not going to school to get educated if you're not planning on coming home and working in that field and dedicating your life to it. So I think you make an excellent point. A lot of time there's a disconnect between who we send to school to study what and what they're going to do when they come back.
Exactly. We know who we're sending. So what we should have is some sort of database that says, okay, Zhavago and Walandra, they're off to school for accounting. So when they come back to home, yeah, they need some sort of work and they need to pay the government back. So what can we do? Or even if you know that all your government slots are filled, you need to have a job in place for them. So then you begin looking at the hotels and the private sector after that. You look at them and say, okay, well, these two coming home with their accounting degrees, fully qualified. I see that you have this manager in this position. This person coming home next year, I give your manager 3 years because those other 2 years, they have to train him. Mm-hmm. And then after that, you cut the leash.
Listen, it comes back to the topic we're discussing. And again, I keep telling you, I am so impressed by your generation, because if you go back before my generation, there are guys who I have a relationship with. They're more in a mentor role, guys who are like 10, 20 years from me. And they tell me when they first graduated high school, they got a job with, I'll give you an example. I won't call his name, but a gentleman. He got a job with an accounting firm. He wanted to be an accountant. He was placed to work under an expat accountant who had a work permit. The deal was, legislation at the time, he would then go off to school, and by the time he came back, that expat, his work permit wouldn't be renewed beyond that point. His time was up. It was a contingency plan, or basically a replacement plan, however you want to structure it. Then, fortunately, the company expanded, so they had room for both of them.
To keep him now.
Well, guess what? Another young man joined the firm, wanted to be an accountant. So he went to school. He came back. The guy eventually. Nope, he had to go. He had to leave. Listen, everybody loved him. He was a great guy. But the Turks and Caicos Islanders first. It's nothing personal. You have a responsibility to the people within your country. So it's not. It's like when people say, okay, Zhavago is smart. That doesn't mean Willandra's not smart.
Right.
We're talking about Zhavago. And it's the same thing with Turks and Caicos Islanders first. When we say Turks and Caicos Islanders first, it doesn't mean everyone's last, but our priority is Turks and Caicos Islanders. So we don't have time to deal with people being offended by this kind of statements, because we have a country to build.
Definitely. I feel as if slowly but surely we'll get to that unapologetic state again, but I feel as if first we have to pass the hurdle of not ostracizing those who were born here. So over the years, you've had a lot of expats came here, had children here, never left. Children been here for 17, 18 years, school from baby, everything. And yet, when they speak, we say, or when they try to say something about Turks and Caicos, we say, oh, you don't know Turks Islander, he's a Haitian, he's a Bahamian, he's a Jamaican, he's a whatever. So what it does is it ostracizes them, and it hinders our nationalism process.
Mm-hmm.
So, and on top of that, when they're at home, their parents are already telling them, hey, look, you don't know TI, you see how they just treat you, use of this, use of that. Whatever other nationality. So we're also feeding into that, which they're already getting at home. And plus on the outside, they're getting it double. So they don't associate as Turks and Caicos Islanders any longer.
I think you hit the nail on the head with one of what's going to be a major issue for us in, I'd say, not just now, but in the next 10 to 20 years. And I might go off on a rant right now. But the fact is, once we decide who a Turks and Caicos Islanders is, then Turks and Caicos Islander first will always make sense. But who are we now with our numbers to turn away Turks and Caicos Islanders? We with the numbers that we have now, we need to grow. And I know your generation, because even my generation, we're not popping out 10, 15 kids like they were back in the day. So I know Gen Z, you're lucky if you get one or two. But the reality is we need Turks and Caicos Islanders. So as a country, you have to look at this as a business decision. I'm not going to bring you on board, whether as a child or even if you're born here. Invest in your education. Like I said, you cut your teeth here. Your navel string might have dropped here. You learned to walk here. You had your first girlfriend here. You grew up right next door to the young man whose parents been here their whole entire life. I'm not going to make that significant investment and then watch you leave. Buddy, you getting a passport, you a Turks and Caicos Islander, we locking you in here for life. We're not in the business of throwing away Turks and Caicos Islanders. That makes absolutely no sense. And I genuinely don't care how people feel about it from an emotional point of view. It just makes business sense. So for me, once you make that kind of investment in a human being, you need to reap the rewards of that, whether that's 40, 50 years of contributing to NIB or NHIB, whether that's contributing to the economy, whether that person becomes an Olympic athlete or a brilliant scientist that becomes a face for your country, or whether that person goes on to work in the civil service for 40 years and dedicate that. We just need those kind of bodies. And another issue that went back to even 2012, there's a big discussion when I was running in the general election. We were having conversations about changing the legislation for elected officials and ultimately premier with people with they were thinking about making it mandatory that an individual would have to be born in Turks and Caicos unless they eventually hold the position of premier. So that one, because we won't have anyone in the next 20 years to be premier. We're gonna have a 150-year-old man or woman sitting in that position, because the reality is many of us have our children in other countries and we love to save basically for the opportunity, but it's many reasons, health reasons, comfortability with the health facilities here. I'm not gonna knock the TCI hospital. I've never had a bad experience with them, but at the same time, I've never carried a baby for 9 months. I've never given birth. So who am I to tell this you, young mother, wherever you say you want to have this child, this we go. And if you say we're going to South Africa, we get on a plane and go to South Africa.
And not only that, we can't punish people for where they're born. You don't choose where you are born. That is not your choice. You don't have a choice in where you are born. So I know
you don't punish the parents either.
Exactly.
Because listen, having my child okay, let's do the math here. So we all know how this goes. We've all seen it. You get on a flight, you go to Miami, you go to New York, you go wherever you go, you have the baby, you waiting in line to get the passport, because as soon as you get the passport, you're booking your first flight back home, right? We all know how this works.
My baby was 2 weeks when I got the passport.
Listen, you waiting in line, as soon as the passport reach you, book your ticket and you go. And as soon as you get home, that baby, that's home. That baby don't know about New York or Florida besides going away for Christmas and summer. That's a Turks Island baby. That baby took his first steps in Turks Island. That baby fall down in Turks Island. That's a Turks Island baby. Who cares where the delivery was performed? That's a TI baby. We're not in the business of giving away kids. That makes absolutely no sense. So again, that's where your generation is going to have to come and get actively involved in how legislation is shaped, because something like that could slip through the cracks and we would never know. It get discussed in House of Assembly, voted on, no real contribution made, and then all of a sudden your children are disenfranchised because someone wasn't being thoughtful about 20, 30 years in the future.
Definitely. So I see Mr. Bean in the comments is saying that his generation was once excited to return home. I'm not sure if you're just tuning in, Mr. Bean. However, we did speak about providing incentives for those persons who have found permanent residency abroad. To bring them back home would be for the private sector to offer them the same sweet deals that they're giving to the expats. And of course, they'll come home. And when I say the same sweet deals, it's not just the paycheck. It also includes all of the other extras, such as housing or vehicle or whatever the case may be, because your salary as well as the benefits that come along with it shouldn't be determined based on your nationality. It should be determined based on your qualifications. That's just the reality of it. And we also need to begin to, as a government, follow up on these things. So you need to look at the advertisements. And if you see in the advertisements that, hey, look, this person advertised for a $10 an hour position, and yet when you somehow come across their contract, you see that this person getting paid $20 an hour and it ain't a local, well, something going on. So how come it went from 10 to 20 all of a sudden?
The okie doke, man, the oldest trick in the book. They say one hand in your pocket, the other hand chicken finger in your eye. But it's not just with jobs, it's businesses too. We sometimes forget the local business owner, from the small, the middle, and even the large business owner. They deserve recognition in terms of legislative incentives as well. When Willandra starts a company, Willandra keeps the money here. It's more likely that Willandra will keep the money here. Willandra will rent an apartment here. Willandra will build a house here, her car here, her kids will go to school here. You get more economic retention by empowering your people. So the same incentives that would offer a big developer that's gonna do a resort development or whatever kind of project, we should not only offer Willandra, but if Willandra and Bernicia and Leo and Benjamin come together and decide, look, we want to do something big, there should be legislation in place to not only provide you with access to land and capital, but I'm talking about tangible resources, whether it's the kind of training for not just you, but whatever staff you want to hire, and find you locals to work for your company, help your company grow and ensure its growth, because that's ultimately benefiting the country. You just have to look at running a country like running a business.
Yes. Something that in one of the first episodes with Benjamin and Javan from St. Lucia that we spoke about was the fact that Caribbean countries need to now become competitive when it comes to the incentives we're offering to foreign investors. So once you have all of the countries aligning with basically the same thing, when St. Lucia turn you down, you don't get run to Turk because you're getting the same deal anyway. Mm-hmm. So what we're doing is we're selling ourselves short as a region when we could be a lot more powerful as a region if we just work together.
I agree. Look, it's the same thing we talk about settling. So Turks and Caicos Islanders have to settle, but on the other side, we're so thirsty that we would tolerate anything in terms of the inward investment. So it's like you said, whereas another country would turn you down and say that doesn't benefit my country enough, we would come, not necessarily us, but another country would come and say, well, I'm willing to make this sacrifice to accommodate this project, but the people that are really making the sacrifice are your local people. And I think ultimately you have to have people there that look at these projects on an independent basis, an individual basis, and see how does it affect Turks and Caicos Islanders, but on a grand scope. We're small enough where you could say, look, this project here could make 40 Turks and Caicos Islanders millionaires by making you partner up with 40 Turks and Caicos Islanders in the form of shareholders, equity shareholders, and whether they have to contribute financially or the government secures their contribution as a shareholder, and they can eventually pay it off through dividends. These are opportunities that we don't even have. You, as a Turks and Caicos Islander Generation Z, the idea of an unsecured loan is a dream. You've probably never even heard of it. It doesn't exist, right? Our financial institution, our banks here are, God forgive me for saying this, but it's a joke. It's like they're probably gonna come after me for saying something like that, but it's a reality. It's a joke. Our banks here are, compared to what you see in other parts of the world, I don't know what's going on. It's an embarrassment.
When I was in school in Barbados, I could have actually gotten a student loan from First Caribbean Bank.
Listen, my undergrad, they gave me as, what was I, $70,000 as an undergrad to pay for my education. $70,000. I never had a real job. They're like, all right, we're making this investment in you, and ultimately, if you get the degree, you can earn the money and pay it back. Unfortunately, it worked out that way, but they gave a 17-year-old $70,000. You know, it's crazy. But in the U.S. right now, I have a friend, John Hope Bryant, and he's always sending me these things on Instagram and emails, and I kind of get upset with it because it's opportunities for Black business owners, young Black business owners, unsecured loans, $20,000, banks offering you a credit card, $10,000 limit for your small business. If you have a business in this particular field, the government's offering you 0.5 acres in the middle of downtown, or they have these co-ops that are available. Many businesses fail for the main reason, access to capital. And that is what your generation has been robbed. Even when our country didn't have capital back in the day, we had land. We could give you land to build your house. The bank would give you a loan because you had land. You had land to build your business. Someone would finance you because you had land. At least the bare minimum, we could offer you land. Right now, as a member of Generation Z, you have to go out there and compete in a real estate market that's not even geared towards you.
Exactly.
That's not your real estate market.
Yeah. When we pause, is it on pause or is it continue? Just discontinue the raffle system.
Oh, don't get me started on the raffle system.
that really
How can they make you enter a raffle for your birthright? Your birthright as a Turks and Caicos Islander is a piece of Turks and Caicos, but somehow we've reduced that to sticking your name in a hat, shaking it around. Listen, I know that there's a grander scheme to it, and I probably shouldn't be making fun of it because I'm sure a lot of thought was put into it.
But it needs more thought in the process of figuring it out, and
But it needs a part of a plan. We don't even have. We need true land use planning in a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year development plan. There are people out here who are so backed up on their mortgages and losing their houses and their land that government gave them to build their homes on a daily basis. In other countries, I know people always talk about the Singapore method or Singapore to the point where you get tired of it. I hear Lee Kuan Yew's name in my sleep. But the way they did it, the government built all the homes. The government built the home. So if you're Belandra, Singaporean, the government automatically finances you a home when you finish college. So they give you a flat, whether it's a 2-bedroom. If you're married, it's a bigger flat. They put up the deposit for you. They finance it. Now, unfortunately, if you get divorced, you got to pay back the full rate, not the discounted rate. But they've thought about their future in terms of making life easier for their local people.
Actually, Trinidad actually pays for the first degree for all Trinidadians. You automatically have your first degree that you're entitled to go off to school to. And if you decide not to go, then fine. But also remember that there is a UE campus in Trinidad as well. But you do have the opportunity to attend. I'm not sure if it's limited to just UE.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've spoken to a few Trinidadians who did say that their first degree is secured. You don't have to worry about how you can pay for it, none of that. So when you finish school, you know, if you have the desire to go off to school, you just send in your application or whatever, and I think they call it GATE or something like that, if I remember correctly, Gateway.
Listen,
But
I'm all about the social. I would never consider myself a socialist. I'm more of a capital. I'm more of a capitalist. I'm definitely not a market. but what I will say is, we have a responsibility to educate our people and teach our people how to fish. That's a responsibility. We need to be responsible for your education even till the very end. If you're going to be an MD, to the very end, and even after that, I'm talking about government-backed secured loans for homes. You should not have to come up with a deposit for even 95% financing for local. It sounds so attractive until, as a young local, you walk into the bank and then they tell you about the 1% legal fees and the 1% bank fee and then the stamp duty and this, and you're looking at a $180,000 home, which doesn't exist, by the way. But you now, listen, show me where it is, right? Right. But even if, you still would have to come up in some cases with $30,000. Now, you just graduated from college. You have some people are fortunate enough to have scholarships. Some people have that, but you're not just sitting out on $30,000. And there's this idea that maybe your parents have it, but some parents don't. I think those kind of things need to be looked at. Why are the financial institutions treating all of us the same? They say the 5%. What does the 5% mean? Is it proof that I can generate that kind of income? If I'm already living in an apartment that's more than what the mortgage would be, isn't that proof that I can pay?
Not even 5%. You reaching is 10%.
See, again, dear God. But yeah, you see the circumstances that your generation has to live under. It's crazy. I was having a conversation with a young person the other day, and she has a 9-to-5, and she's just started a catering business. And we met coming out of revenue control unit, and she had just come from paying for a license, and she was all upset. And we were just having a conversation, and I'm like, just the idea that she is a Turks and Caicos honor, right? And she just walked in a revenue control unit to pay a business license fee. Now, simply thinking that doesn't sound like anything, right? But when you look at it, a Turks and Caicos honor had an idea to start a business, and she had to go and pay, I think it was $600, whatever it was, $600 out of her pocket before she does anything.
Anything.
Before she rents a unit, before she goes to the bank to find out. She had an idea, right? Before she did anything, she had to come up with $600 in her own country to start a business.
Before you go to Invest TCI, you need your business license too.
Shouldn't Invest TCI be the ones issuing the business license? Shouldn't you walk into Invest TCI with your business plan and say, this is the business what I want to do? They read through it, make sure you're prepared, hand you a business license, no fee, and help you from step to step in making that business. Why are you paying for a business license? You're a Turks and Caicos that wants to do business in your home. Why do we, what does that $600 prove? How does that $600 help you?
Or even if, because I do understand that the government needs capital and all of this good stuff, even if we implement it after 2 years of being in business or whatever the case may be, so it's not a part of your startup costs, but we definitely need to look at it because there are so many young and talented people, especially COVID has really shown the talented and Turks that want to open businesses and they just don't have the funds for the business license.
No, listen, the fund for the business license, they don't have a lot of young people don't have the money for the idea. Like, you don't have the money to come up with an idea. It's our responsibility to kick doors open for them, not put doors and hurdles in their way. Listen, we've become a country of red tape. We really have. And that in itself is another political conversation. And just the whole idea of good governance. How does good governance equal red tape? There's not enough hours in the day, but I need to see less red tape for Turks and Caicos Islanders. There should be no red tape. There should be a red carpet. We should be strolling down the aisle to economic success and economic independence. That's the only way we're ever going to achieve national independence. If our people aren't independent, how can our country be independent?
Definitely. That's deep. If our people aren't independent, how can the country? Yes. We, as a nation, need to think about what do we want for our country and begin to create those building blocks for what we actually want. Because we are so far behind, especially when it comes to our constitution. There's a lot of things that needs reforming, a lot of reform needs to take place before we even begin to empower our people. So although the framework is there for some empowerment in terms of legislation, there's so much more that can be done, and we need to begin to open the alleys and speak about it openly. Not only speak about it openly, but put pressure on our governments so that they're able to get the job done and they know that, hey, look, this is exactly what we want.
I couldn't agree more. Our topic was structuring legislation to empower Turks and Caicos Islanders. Legislation is the answer. Your people, they're the question. You need to look at your people and see what they want and create the legislation that benefits them. You cannot create legislation before having the dialogue with your people. It's impossible. Legislation is the answer to their questions. You know the age-old story where they tell a politician, don't come to my house unless you bring land papers and a bag of money, right? People laugh and they get upset and they think that means corruption. Whoever says that is a genius. They're absolutely right. Not because they're talking about buying a vote. If you look at it from a philosophical point of view, their right is access to capital and access to land. If you go back 20 years ago, you had access to capital, whether it's an unsecured loan, you had access to land, residential and commercial. So this person asking for it now, they're not looking for a bribe. They want their birthright.
And I feel like pre-2009, that atmosphere was there, pre-2009. However, with the suspension of the Constitution and all of these different things, the idea of Turks and Caicos Islanders being first and the idea of you demanded your birthright was taken away. So
you know that conversation. That conversation right there gets people in trouble. But you know, I know you know what I'm talking about.
No, it's something serious to think about because we are now in the time frame where history has been made by our constitution being suspended, and Gen Z, who is the generation that is now coming up to vote, a lot of them probably, this is talking about them, a lot of us,
Mm-hmm.
I'm Gen Z,
Acting
a lot of
grown.
us are probably too young to even know of what I'm even speaking about, to even know that, hey, the Constitution was actually suspended or whatever the case may be. So we need to begin to speak our truth and learn our history, because even though that didn't happen too long ago, it has had so much impact on us to this very day. We are still impacted to this very day. We are still limited as a country. And I don't think we truly appreciate it. We don't truly realize to what extent we are limited as a country. And I feel like it's that way because a lot of our young people aren't, one, we claim that we're not interested in politics. And what we don't realize is politics literally controls the world you live in. You have no choice but to be interested in politics. You have no choice but to know what is going on in your country. If you're not interested in politics, that means you're not interested in your life.
You couldn't have said it better. Listen, as a young person, especially your generation, you cannot say you're not interested in politics. That is impossible. You live in an overseas territory. Your country isn't independent. You haven't reached the finish line yet. We need all hands on deck. Everyone is a politician. Everyone is a contributor. Everyone is here to make a difference. Until we reach independence, then we can start diversifying and really pushing in other areas. But everyone has to be a part of this movement. Listen, my child, my children, and I hope to say this for yours and everyone else, will not know what it is to have their constitution suspended. That
Right?
should be our goal. I'm grown. You can't suspend my laws. How does that sound? You can't walk into my house and say whatever laws in the Jolly household no longer applies. No, we don't do that here.
You got put
We,
on
we,
timeout.
what?
By mommy and daddy.
We grown. So our goal as Turks and Caicos Islanders is to make sure that no generation will ever have to go to that kind of insulting embarrassment ever
Well,
again.
Zhavago, yes, we're grown. However, like you said, when you're 18 and still living in mommy and daddy house, you got to do what mommy and daddy say. So,
I'm plotting, but we plotting. What I tell you, I got the poster on the wall of the house I'm gonna live in, the car I'm gonna drive. I know all the tattoos I'm gonna get. I'm plotting being an adult. I might be sitting here being a kid, but I'm just counting the seconds. All right, daddy think he can talk to me any kind of way. Wait till I get my own house. I raising my children different. I do it everything different. And that's what being a grown-up is all about. But I think as Turks and Caicos Islanders, we should be angry. We should be upset. I am. You, and it's nothing personal. It's national pride.
but we're very passive as a nation. So, there are a lot of people that are angry and that are upset. However, many of them are civil servants. So, you could only say so much and you can only do so much before you're penalized.
You throw a shade?
Pardon?
You throw a shade?
No, I'm really not. I'm just speaking the truth. So what happens is, because the bulk of persons who are able to vote or even have a say that are Turks and Caicos Islanders that are civil servants, you've taken the voice away from a lot of
I,
people.
I think you're absolutely right. You're actually preaching to the choir. I'm a civil servant. You know, my day job, I work as the senior press officer for the Turks and Caicos government. Me being on this show carries a certain amount of risk. I say one thing, you know, who knows what's going to come out of it on Monday. But at the end of the day, again, all it takes, I can't remember the exact same, but somehow it ends with for
Uncut
good
is
men to
hiring,
be
okay?
silent. Was
Uncut.
that?
This is a disclaimer. Uncut isn't hiring.
Oh, okay. I don't join tables. I make my own tables. But
Right.
no, but
That's how
listen,
Turks and Caicos Island is supposed to do it.
that should be the unanimous attitude. But I think you made a good point about civil servants. Some of our best and brightest work in the civil servants, and a lot of them do feel stifled and go through these certain challenges. And again, we talk about the red tape. A lot of even the public service handbook that was changed, but a lot of the rules that make it difficult for Turks and Caicos Islanders to speak out are a part of the same constitutional, stem from the same constitutional suspension that we talked about, where people put red tape in place and call it good governance, but all you're really doing is disenfranchising locals. Why can't I talk about my country? Because I work for my country? That doesn't make any sense. If anyone should want to talk about their country and how to improve their country, it's the people that work there and see what goes on internally. They know more what improvements need to be made. So look, I think more people should take the risk. Don't do what I do unless you got some backup income. You can take those kind of risks.
No, but you know what's gonna happen? You could only ostracize one or two, but you can't ostracize the whole bunch.
I agree. We're strength in numbers.
Exactly. So when civil servants begin to stand up together and not singly stand up, your voices will be so much louder, and the government won't have a choice but to allow you to speak and allow you to say what it is, say your truth, because nobody can punish you for the truth.
Listen, that's Turks and Caicos Islanders on a whole. I'm not familiar with this quiet Turks and Caicos. This isn't the Turks and Caicos I and people in my generation grew up talking about. Like I told you, my Turks and Caicos, buildings was going up, roads was getting built, flying cars was on its way. You know what I mean? This was Shangri-La. Listen, we all had expectations of owning Fortune 500 companies, being the next this Zuckerberg and this Tesla, Musk, and we believe those things to be true because of where we live. We believe those opportunities were here for us, and we had legislation to support that. So this idea where Turks and Caicos Islanders should be quiet is ridiculous. And I think as much as people like to give social media users a hard time, because you do have they talk about the hacked accounts and people who are just out there starting fires for the sake of starting fire. That's not a good enough a reason to ignore it as a legitimate source. That is your generation's main tool. It's how you communicate. So we can't just discredit it because some people use it to talk, garbage.
Not only is it our main tool, I think COVID-19 has changed everything in the world. And now, because of COVID, it is literally the way to communicate. It is just like going on the street and protesting now.
Absolutely. But, I think it's so crazy that we just got comfortable not demanding more. I don't know when we became that settling country. I can't, it's strange. I don't understand it. For a period, I thought it was temporary, like I said, because we went through a constitutional suspension, and I thought it was all about just recovering and figuring out how to survive under new conditions. To be honest, we've only just gone through our second government, because we had our first general election after that in 2012. So we had the PAP administration, now we've had the PDM administration. So we've only just gone through a full cycle of both parties. But I feel like at this point now, we should be back to our old self, demanding the best. We deserve the best. Turks and Caicos, there are people who dream to come here and live here. And what they dream of should be our lives on a day-to-day basis.
It goes back to the point of Turks and Caicos Islanders first. The only way to have the best is to know that you deserve the best. So we have, as a people, been told that you're not allowed to say that anymore. So we now need to begin to gain our voices back, because we were silenced for that period of time. So we need to gain our voices back and be able to be bold enough, because I feel as if now we're silenced to the point where we're afraid we're going to get punished again. That's the problem.
Listen, Turks and Caicos is a 10. You take us out for a day, you got to take us down by Crackpot and get us lobster tail. You can't just take us anywhere, treat us anyhow. We're a 10. We're not settling for anything. And it's like I said before, we need to make this statement a decree. We're not having our constitution suspended again. That's not a thing. And that's not putting the onus on our local people. That's just putting the world on blast, just putting the world on notice. That's not happening again. Our goal is our own independence, not just nationally, but as individuals. We deserve it. We are capable of it. All we need is a plan. And no conversation anyone having with us, politician or not, should not include how they plan to implement this. That should be from the door. How am I going to make your life better as a Turks and Caicos Islander, ultimately in an independent Turks and Caicos Islands?
Right. You know, Zhavago, we are young as a people. We have a lot of young people in this nation, and revolution usually starts with the youth. And I feel as if with Gen Z now coming up, there's a fire in Gen Z to see better, because we have, even though we may have been young, because back in 2009, I probably, how old was I? I think I was like just coming out of sixth grade or something like that. Was I just coming out of sixth grade?
Child.
Right.
Child.
Yeah, I'm a baby. And so it has ignited a fire. And for me, I was always one who was in the know of what was going on. So when the Constitution got suspended, it wasn't just like what was going on, because my mom literally explained what was happening. So the conversation of politics starts in the home. And when I say politics, it's not party politics or anything like that. It's issues, it's national issues. You need to have that conversation with your children so they begin to understand the importance of knowing what is going on in your nation. So many kids around that time in my class never even watched the news before.
Oh, you're absolutely right. You know how many young people right now don't know who the name of the premier, the deputy premier, the deputy governor, the PS of this or that. These are conversations we need to have in our households. But I think it's not just limited to dialogue, it's also to action. Our kids need to see us actively getting involved. They need to hear us participating in these conversations to know why, but they need to see us moving and shaking, because they're going to be the ones that are going to really carry us over the finish line. Because if you look at it and say we're about 25, 30 years roughly from independence, right? I would say less, but let's be conservative. Well, maybe not you, but some of us are going to be 60, 70 on the tail end of a good life, whereas they're going to be the ones to really shape how your country looks post-independent. So again, we need to have conversations with them that are very realistic, but at the same time, we need to entertain their imagination. But if we're not putting, again, the legislation in place where they could be the best versions of themselves, then what are we doing?
We not only need to have conversations with our kids, but we also need to have conversations with those in the region. And I am so glad, I'm so grateful for choosing to go to school in Barbados. When I went to school in Barbados, my eyes was open to so much of what was happening in the Caribbean, because oftentimes when we talk about our neighboring countries, we only think of Bahamas and Jamaica, maybe the DI and Haiti. And once I went to Barbados and I realized how big the Caribbean was, I literally did not even know that there was an Eastern Caribbean dollar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the EC dollar.
Right. And so I learned so much. Not only did I learn about Caribbean countries, but I also had to learn about Caribbean history, because when I went, I asked me anything about American history. Asked me how many presidents got impeached and all. Like literally, I was on it. But when it came to Caribbean history, I knew surface things. And one of my professors pulled me aside and he was like, hey, look, like you need to do some catch up reading, because I could tell you don't know nothing. Mm-hmm. And so that really put me on my game. And I literally went behind closed doors and I was tasked with the daunting task of keeping up with my schoolwork and doing basic groundwork that I should have had when I went there. And what it did was it also taught me that the road that we're about to go down or trying to go down in the country that we're trying to build, our Caribbean brothers and sisters have already done it. They've already been there. And there's a lot of things that we could learn from them. There's a lot of mistakes that we cannot make if we take advice from them.
You're absolutely right. Exposure is so vital. You can't put a price on exposure. That's why I honestly think our kids should be going to school all over the world. the most out of the way place, as long as it's specialized in that field, this is where our kids should be going to school. We should have kids in the region. We should have kids in North and Central South America, but we should have our kids in Africa, in the Asian countries, especially Southeast Asia, where so many smaller countries have learned to kind of develop while going through hurdles we've never even seen, because we're very fortunate in terms of where we're placed geographically, and we're so close to the US and we have the US dollar. But there are countries that are landlocked, no beaches, and they were able to develop, and while they were fighting wars that there's no way they could have won. So what happens when we send brilliant minds like yours out to these countries? You act as a sponge. You see everything out there these other countries capable of. And then you take that national pride that, oh, TCI, we gonna do it better than they did it. Because
Right?
now we see the mistakes they made, and you're gonna bring that home. And that attitude you have, you won't tolerate less than. So you come home now and you see something that you might consider janky, you'd be like, no, that's not good enough for my country. We can do it better, because in Barbados, they did this. So Barbados implemented this system. Now with the 21st century technology or whatever, we can enhance it even more. And it just goes to show, I was just on Google the other night, and I was looking at this bridge in Japan that they built from one island to another small island to another small island. And all of a sudden I'm like, why haven't we connected Provo to North Caicos to Middle Caicos to South? And, and these are ideas where people look at, oh my God, the money that's going to cost, the investment. But then you start thinking further. You start thinking about a deep sea port in South Caicos, and then you can truck things back and forth. And now all of a sudden, the cost of everything goes cheaper because you can bring things in much bigger vessels than you have in South Dock, and then you can do storage facilities, and you could be the shipping center for the career. It just goes to show you, when you see things, your mind starts to work, and then you get to bring that home to your country. But unfortunately, we're going to lose a lot of people like you, because you're going to go to Barbados, and then you're going to come home, and then you're going to be treated like an alien, or there's going to be some kind of struggle, because again, we start to think whatever you're talking about is too big for us. Somehow, all of a sudden, we don't deserve it. And you're going to want to go back to the place where it's common. It's a common discussion. You don't want to leave home, but you don't want to stifle your creativity either. So we have to find a way to lock in our young people and create the kind of opportunities, because like I said, we're a business. We're going to benefit from your knowledge, your experience. We've made that investment in you. Why send you there to learn everything you learn if we're not going to put it to use? That's like sending an employee to study accounts, and then you turn around and you put them in the manufacturing center, that on the assembly belt. So exposure is necessary, but what do we do with that exposure when you come home?
Exactly. So now we're on to the question of, once you expose your people and empower your people, do you think that that will spark some sort of nationalism, so that we could begin to have a sense of national pride again within our country?
Absolutely. We just talked about, look how excited you got when you started talking about Barbados. You lit up like you and Honorable Motley were homegirls or something like that. Like you got the spark will happen automatically. Brilliant minds, they're ready to spark. We need to be here waiting with the gasoline. It's simple. You're gonna come back off that flight home. I've seen it. I can't put a number on it. I've seen it so many times where young people come back, and it's like this energy. You talk about your friend Benjamin that came back. I'm friends with, I think, his older brother, older cousin, or something. And he was talking about his cousin that's coming back, and he studied this, and he can't wait to do that. And it took me back to me and my friends when we came home. We would come home for summers from school, and we'd be turning up, but the whole time we're turning up, we're thinking about, man, when we graduate, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. So I see it now in your generation. That spark is there. It's going to happen. What do we do with it? So the legislation that we're talking about now should speak to that. It's not just the job. We need to think beyond having the employment set up for you, although that is mandatory. We need to think about how we're going to create access to capital to pursue your dream, but also to make your social life better. Like I said, the unsecured loan for your house, the opportunity to encourage you guys to get married and have more children, because ultimately that's what we need. We need more Turks Island kids. So we need you guys to make a ton of babies, although we need to import it. But
on your run for that one.
But no, we need, this is what we need. We need you to be comfortable at home so you can go out and kill it in the business world or whatever your field is. So when you come home, you shouldn't be worried about, oh my God, how am I going to get a loan to buy a house? How am I going to get a car? How am I going to do this? There should be opportunities that make it easier for you to not have to sell out, which means although you studied engineering or whatever, you take the first job that comes available because there's nothing else. You work at the bank or something that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing, but you need a check because you have to live. So we need to think beyond that, because when you come back, you're the one that's going to build that bridge. You're the one that's going to start that science program. You're the one, like we have kids that were Division I athletes. They study things along those fields, whether it's personal training or I don't know the educational term for it, but they've studied fields and what they did. Not only do these guys high functioning athletes, they've networked with other athletes. So when they come home, they have the opportunity to create those kind of training camps. Yes, they have access so they can do training camps and invite their much more successful friends to come down and be a part of what they're doing and help train our kids. And out of this one that was a Division I athlete and may not have made it to the highest level, we will create the next one who will take it even further. So yeah, we have to be here with the gasoline. What good is the spark if we smother it?
Yes, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for coming on to Uncut. And I'd just like to know, what empowering words would you have for our young Turks and Caicos Islanders?
Well, you highlighted that perfectly. Young Turks and Caicos Islanders. Listen, push. Do not give up. Make outrageous, outlandish, unreasonable demands. Shoot for the stars. You end up on the moon. You have your wildest and creative ideas and put them everywhere. Put them on Facebook. Put them on Instagram. Every time. Yes, put it Pinterest. I don't know if that's still a thing, but just put it out there. Unfortunately, right now, it's like I said, a lot of legislation works, but it doesn't work for us. It may not work for you, but it will someday. It definitely will. Be vocal about what you want. And when you identify what you want in a candidate, whether it's a political candidate or even an individual, push them into a role where they can help to push your agenda. That's how it works in any other countries. Capitalists support capitalists, socialists support socialists, and they push their agenda. If you're a capitalist, you put your energy and your support behind a capitalist, and when they get into a position of influence, they will push your capitalist agenda. So when you, as a young person, see someone that synonymizes everything you believe in, you put all your support and energy behind them until they can reach that level where they can directly impact your future. That is the most important thing. Don't just talk. Make your talk action. Everything you do means nothing unless you can push one person or your group or your agenda to be successful. And one more thing, partner up. Like seriously, partner up in economics, in the private sector, partner up. I see too many people trying to do their own thing. Unfortunately, our system isn't designed for that. We don't have the opportunities a lot of the expats have in terms of access to capital and support. So sometimes 10 of you are going to have to come together with $5,000 or two and make $50,000 into a business. You can take $50,000 and buy into a lot of businesses now that are experiencing struggles from COVID and need capital to keep going. And hopefully when things pick back up, you would now be an equity owner in an existing business and you would be entitled to profits and shares as dividends. Every time you and your friends hang out, talk about making money, talk about bettering your country. See how much money Belandra got, see how much money Benicia got. If you only got 1,000, put that together, 10 of y'all got 10 grand, y'all need to go out there and invest in one of these businesses, start your own business. All we have is each other. We don't have to access the other people have. There is power and partnership. So use each other. That's all you have. Don't be like all these the previous generation. They were able to do it by themselves because they have access to things. So 10 of you are going to have to amount to what one Turks and Caicos Islander had 20 years ago. But that's okay. It's better to have 50% of a million than to have 100% of 100,000.
Right.
So I guess that's it. Oh, one more thing. I want to give a shout out to my son Eli. It's his birthday on Monday. What's up, little man? Chubb. He's gonna appreciate that.
I think that was some awesome advice. Definitely for us as Turks and Caicos Islanders to pull together. That is one of our biggest downfall as a people. And Mr. Jolly, you put a lot on us to absorb today, to take in, to meditate on tonight and throughout the week. And so I just like to thank you for coming on Uncut. And of course, this will not be the last time because this conversation could have gone on for so much longer, but we're gonna save it for another time because there's so many aspects of our country that we need to tackle. And not just you and I, but us as a people and as Turks and Caicos Islanders. I pray that we're able to use our voices more and stand up for what we believe in. So thank you guys for tuning in to Uncut.
This is Uncut. Can't get enough. The truth ain't holding back. This ain't no bluff. You are deserving that. Sometimes it's rough. No, I ain't holding back. Cause this is Uncut. This is Uncut. This is Uncut. No, I ain't holding back. Sometimes it's rough. This is Uncut. This is Uncut. The truth, you deserving that.